Okay, it is 3 o'clock. Welcome to this webinar today. We're very excited, as always, to be partnering with Technovation Girls Rhode Island. This is Sarah Frame speaking now. I'm the Executive Director of our Education Foundation at Mass TLC and work side by side with my colleague Ruth Morris on the Technovation Girls Massachusetts Challenge. Very quickly, before we get into today's webinar, I just want to announce a few dates that'll be coming up. One is tentatively February 29th, a UI UX workshop that will be in person. More information will be provided on that soon. We'll also be having the companion to this, Advanced App Inventor workshop, which will be taking place at MIT on March 14th. A reminder for anybody that hasn't already registered their team, the last day to register on the platform is March 16th. No reason to wait. I highly suggest, if you haven't done so yet, to go ahead and do that. And then the submission deadline for your projects are April 20th. This year, and our final showcase is on May 16th, taking place at Wentworth Institute of Technology, where it has been taking place the last couple of years. It's an amazing program. Another reminder on that is you need to, for senior teams, be at the final showcase in order to move on to the next level if your scores allow you to move on. If you're not at that final showcase in person, you are not able to do that. So without further ado, one more piece of housekeeping is, if you do have questions throughout, please type them in the questions box in your toolbox, with your GoToWebinar toolbox on your screen. And then Ruth and I will read those out to Joe. This will also be available after today up on the Mass TLC Education Foundation website. So you can find it there along with several other resources and videos. Okay, so Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Hello, everyone. This is Joe Mazzone. I am the Regional Ambassador for Technovation in Rhode Island. And I'm going to take you through an introduction to App Inventor today. We'll make your first app if this is your first time using App Inventor. There are a couple things you can do with this video. If you're participating right now, you can follow along as I work through and show you everything. As well as, of course, this will be a resource for you if you need to show it to some students later, if you're a mentor watching, or even if you're a student and you need this as a reference later on, the video URL will exist, so you can, of course, access it later and go back and rewind and work through some of these things. If you haven't already and you are going to follow along, make sure you go to appinventor.mit.edu, so that is the URL to get to MIT App Inventor. In order to use MIT App Inventor, you will need to log into a Google account. So as soon as you click on Create Apps, it will ask you or prompt you to choose a Google account to log in if you've already logged into one on the computer, or it will have you log into one there. If for any reason at all, let's say you're in a school that doesn't have Google accounts, or you don't want the students to create your own Google accounts, or any circumstance like that, there is a version of App Inventor that you can use without login credentials. That URL is code.appinventor.mit.edu. So it's this URL right here in the center of my screen. And that one will not have you log into a Google account, but you will have to save your project to the computer each time instead of having it sync with a cloud account that you create. So that's something to keep in mind. But there is an option if you do not want to log into a Google account for any reason to be able to use that URL. And it's for the hour code is the reason why that one exists. So once you do log into your Google account, hopefully everybody has at this point, once you've gone to App Inventor's website, you'll open to your projects page. If you have used it before, you'll have a list of projects similar to me. If not, you won't have any. So to simply create a project, you just click on this Start New Project button. And today, we're going to create an app called Talk to Me. Now, what I want to point out is I just named the project with spaces, and notice it prompts you that project name cannot contain spaces. So there are a couple strategies if you're newer to programming that you want to use. One will be camel casing. So you may have noticed that I used capital letters at the beginning of each of the words in my project name to allow it to be easy to read. The other thing is you can substitute the spaces with underscores, and that's also acceptable for your project's name. So those are two things to use to make your project name readable while still not using spaces to separate the words. So again, click on Start a New Project, and we're going to name this project Talk to Me. Now in this app, we're going to have the actual phone or tablet or whatever device you're using speak to you or say something. And there's a couple different levels of this. So even if you've maybe participated in something that's done a similar MIT App Inventor project, I'm going to bring you through a couple other ideas that I think walks you through some of the basic concepts you'll need no matter the app you're creating. And we'll do it in an easy way for you to start to understand App Inventor. Once you do create your project, you will be launched into, this is the designer interface. This is where we add the different components to our app, as well as set the properties or the design of the way that these different components look on our screen. It also has a blocks area, so in the top right-hand corner, you can switch between design and blocks. In the blocks area is where we're going to add our code or our app's behavior. So these two toggles in the top right-hand corner is how you switch into those two different modes, and those two areas are very important. Before we make any changes or we program the behavior of the app or add anything, it's really important. One of the most powerful features of App Inventor is the ability to live test your app. So while you're designing, you can actually test and use your app to ensure that it's looking and working properly. So there are a couple ways to do this. The best way is to have an Android device. So if you have an Android phone or a tablet, you want to download the MIT AI2 Companion. So you can just search the store for that. This is the Google Play Store URL on my desktop computer here. But in the Google Play Store, you can just search for MIT AI2 Companion and have that installed on your phone or tablet. And once you do, it will look something like this on your actual phone. So when you launch that, this is what it will look like. There are some other options. So with the AI Companion app, once you have it installed on an Android device, you can either connect through Wi-Fi if your Android device and the computer you're using is on the same Wi-Fi or on the same network connection, really. Or you can also use a USB cable, either micro USB or USB Type-C, depending on your device, what it has, to also connect that device to the computer. This is good if you have either poor Wi-Fi or internet connections. You can just use the cable for data transfer of your program. The other option is the one I wouldn't recommend most, especially for Technovation, because when you come to the showcase, you want to be able to show off your app on some device. So it would be the emulator, and there's instructions on MIT's website to download the emulator. So this page is really helpful. You can search for setting up App Inventor. There's also the URL up here, appinventor.mit.edu/explore/AI2/setup. And there is really good instructions on how each of these options work. So you want to install the companion on some device. device. If not, you can use the emulator. And for the USB and the emulator, you have to download, and so in the instructions, it has the link to download this AI starter program. And once you have the AI starter program, you'd have to have this window running, and then you'd be able to actually launch the emulator, which again, is not really recommended, is a little bit slower and maybe frustrating when developing. But it does work. So if that is your last resort, it will work, and you can use that even for today's exercise. But you'll also need to have this open for if you're using the USB connection. With the USB connection, there is a couple other steps when you follow the instructions of things you have to do on the device, such as allow USB debugging and some other things on your actual Android device to do that. So those are things to be aware of. The other thing I'd like to call out before I actually show you how these things may work in the project itself is if you do have an iOS device and you're interested in testing out the beta, do know that this is in beta, and we cannot guarantee any perfect results. But if you have an iPad or an iPhone and you do not think it will be possible at all to get any kind of Android device, though my recommendation would be that some Android devices you can purchase for just $50. You can get a cheap pay-as-you-go phone at Target or something like that, or Walmart. But the iOS companion to test App Inventor apps on iOS, so iPhone or iPad, you can use this URL right here. It is in test flight to be able to access the beta version. So again, I'm going to show you with using the companion, but once you're in App Inventor and you have your project open, you want to go up to Connect, this Connect menu, and there are those three options I just talked about. AI Companion app on your actual phone, using the emulator, or using USB. The emulator or USB, you have to have this AI starter program running in the background. So notice I have this minimized. You have to have this running in order for the emulator to launch. So simply, all you do is you have this running in the background, you click on emulator, and it will open up. USB, very similar. You have to have this running, and then that will open up. And this would be on Mac or Windows. With the AI Companion, it's very simple. Once you have it installed on the device, click on AI Companion. A QR code will appear. This is how your AI Companion will connect on your phone, can connect to App Inventor, where we can actually see our app on the screen. So if I go over and I pull up my phone again, I can simply click Scan QR code. Notice my camera came up, it scanned the QR code, and now it's connecting to my actual app. And there's my app on the screen now. So I'm going to actually now, once you have it connected, now is a good time that we can actually test the connection and we can see some cool things. For instance, the first thing you're going to notice on design is all we have is a screen. So the only component as part of our app is a screen. But we can go over and we can change some aspects of the screen. For instance, find the property that says background color. And if you go over there, you can change it and you can update your background color. And what you should notice, if you noticed on my screen, is not only did my little preview change, but also the app that's running on my device, it automatically updated. This is the beauty of using the Live Companion while you are designing and creating your app, is you see it in real time, what's going on, how it looks, how it feels, how it works, and interact with it. So as soon as I change that background color, I can change it again to a different color. It automatically updates on my device and on the little preview here. So it works really well. Again, that can work with the emulator, or it could work with the USB connection. AI Companion is really the best option. So go ahead, change your background color. There are some other really great properties. We'll play around with them more. but I suggest that as you, especially after this webinar, are playing around with App Inventor more, you can try out some of these different properties. One being that we can look at right now is you'll notice at the top of the screen, it says screen 1. Really, that's not useful to leave there. So what we can do is we can change the title of our app so that this top bar says something different, and we can make it something like the name of our app, like Talk to Me. Or you could pose, and so as soon as I type in that property, notice it changed on my device, it changes in my little preview. So that's the title property. This type of title bar is from older versions of Android. So if you'd like to use a more modern looking version of Android's app design, you can go over here to the theme right above the title, and we can change it instead to the device's default, because I have a newer Android phone. And now you'll notice that the title bar looks like how it does in most modern Android apps. And you, of course, can change that title bar's color. So that might be something else you're thinking about. That's this primary color up here. So maybe I want it to be cyan instead, and now it's updated to cyan. Or maybe I can go over and I want that to be red. So now I have it as a red title bar. So that's that primary color is used for your title bar's color. So in this app, what we're going to do is we're going to have a button, and when we press this button, we're going to make our phone or tablet say something. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use the text-to-speech component. And you've seen this in lots of different apps probably. Even things like your digital assistant like Siri or Google Assistant, they're able to speak to us. So we can add this feature to our app to make the app be able to speak some text. So in order for us to add these new components to our app, we need to visit the palette over here on the left. And the palette features all the different components that you can add into your app. By default, this user interface section's open, but you can click on these other sections to see a number of the different things that you can add and program as part of your app. So the first thing we're going to add is in the user interface category. So if you click on user interface, we can find the button. It's right at the top. And all you're going to do is click and drag the button right onto your screen. And when you'll do that, notice it appeared immediately on my phone. So it works like a button. There's me clicking it. You can kind of see the little feedback there. I'm actually clicking on my phone. And we can see it on the preview here. Of course, now that we have this button, we can change some of the properties of the button. So now, for instance, if we want to have this button be a different color, we can do that. As well as, probably what would be most useful is we want to change the text property of this button. We don't want it to say text for button 1. That's not very useful to our user. We want the user to know what this button does when they click on it. So we can change the text for this button to say something like, make me talk. So now they know when I click on this button, I'm going to make the phone, the tablet talk. There are some other things we can do. Of course, we could change the font size if we want to make this button a little bit, the text on this button a little bit bigger. Maybe you want to make the font bold so it's easier to read. And of course, maybe, for instance, on my red button here, it does not look good at all to have the black text color. So we're going to have to change this to a white text color, or a lighter color at least. So I can change this to white. And then you'll notice the text color changes. So it's definitely helpful to go through and check out these different properties as you add things to kind of see how you can customize your app. Same thing, we could change the shape so it's not this default rounded button. You can make it more rectangular, etc. As well as you can even upload an image to be your button, as in many apps that you probably use, it's actually a picture of a little camera or a number of different things that are the buttons or the things that you click in the app. So one thing you may be wondering is, what if I don't want my button to be in the top left-hand corner here? What if I want this button to be in the center of our screen? Well, we can do that. So before we go and we program anything else, let's go back over to our screen properties. So in order to switch between the properties of the different components we have, you just visit this components tree and you can easily click between them. So I'm going to go back on the screen, and in the screen properties, we have our alignment. And this is where these different components will line up when we drop them into our screen. So if I click on horizontal alignment, for instance, I can say center. And now notice horizontally, left and right, my button is now centered. And then if I want to bring it over to the middle of my screen, I can do the same thing for vertical. I can click center, and it's there. So note that you can also mess around with the alignment of how these components go on our screen, these visible components go on our screen, so you can change that. So now we have a nice button right in the middle of our app screen. So before we can go and actually program this behavior, we do need to add one other thing. Sometimes we add components to our app that aren't visible or aren't a visual thing that we see on the screen or that the user can interact with and click, but instead something that we need to add to our project in order to add that ability. So this is, in order for us to actually make this button say something, we need to go find in media the component called text-to-speech. And when we add this text-to-speech component, again, it's just giving us the ability as a programmer to use this component in our project. So find text-to-speech, again, it's in the media category, and you simply drag it onto the screen. And since it's not something that we're going to see on the screen, don't worry about where you drag it, just drop it right on the middle. And notice it shows up in these non-visible components, because again, it's not something that we visibly see on the screen. Instead, it's something we just add to our project, and the user doesn't know it's there, but we program and use it in our project. There are some properties you can play around with, and in a little bit, I'm going to show you some documentation about how you can look up how things work, but for now, let's leave those to their defaults. So in order to actually make this button work and do its job, we're going to go over to the blocks, which is in the top right-hand corner. This is where we're going to add our code. Go ahead and click on blocks. And what we have here is we have a nice area where we're going to lay out our code. You can click on, these are all built-in blocks. These are things you would expect to find in any project. So you can click on these different things. This is dictionaries. If you've used App Inventor before, this is actually new in the most recent release of App Inventor. But these are things that you would use in any project. If you have used a programming tool like Scratch before, MIT Scratch, or some other of these blocks languages, you may be familiar with Blockly. So App Inventor may feel familiar to you when programming it. The difference, or the great thing about App Inventor, is you're actually making a real app that you can publish to the store. So you can put it on the Android store for millions of people to download and install on their devices. So what we want to look for involves the button. So if you click on the button, these are the components that we have specific to our app down here. So if you click on the button, the first thing we want to look for in an App Inventor project when we go to program it is we need to think about what event we need to program for. So all of App Inventor is event-driven. So if you go over to the button, there are some different events for the button click, button gut focus, a number of different events. So if we want the button click event handler. So you can grab this. So any of these C-shaped, yellowish, brown blocks, these are all event handlers. So we have our button click event handler. So whatever code we put inside of this event handler will run every single time the button is clicked. What we want to do is we want to do something with the text-to-speech when this button's clicked. So we should intuitively know, we got to go over to text-to-speech now and see and find something that we need to do. So open that up. You'll notice text-to-speech has some event handlers part of it, but it also has this purple block right here. And these purple blocks that belong to these different components are what we call a method. They do something. They're an action. So for instance, this one says call text-to-speech.speak. So this actually speaks something. It makes the phone say something. So we can drag this block out, and this is what we want the text-to-speech to do. So we can drag that in. And notice how these blocks just click into place. So it clicks into the event handler here. And so now, every time the button's clicked, it's going to call text-to-speech, speaks method, the speak method, and it's going to say a message. So sometimes methods need information to do their job. So this one needs a message. It needs to know, what do you want me to say? So we can go over to the text category here. We can grab an empty text block or an empty string, we like to call it, and we can type in something that we want it to say. So you can click that in place and you can type something. Anything you want, you can type. And then as soon as you click out of that block, as I said, we're live testing, so hopefully you guys can hear this. I'm gonna press the button close to my microphone.
You are doing great.
And you're doing great. You made your first app. So every time you press the button, it will say that, and you can change this. So maybe I don't want to say great. You are doing awesome. And so as soon as I click off of this, again, my code's gonna update on my device. And now if I press the button again, it's gonna change.
You are doing awesome.
So now it's saying you are doing awesome. So anything that we type in here, it will say. And so what I want to point out with programming here is with App Inventor is you got to think about what's the event I need, and then what are the actions that I need to take place in this event? Is it that certain components need to do something? That's going to be a method, these purple blocks. Or is it some other kind of operations that I need to do? So that's kind of the thought process that you should go through when creating or programming your app. So what I want to add next for us to see some of the other features or the ways that we should think about creating and designing the app is if we were to upload this app to the store, right? Let's say we want to download it, we're going to upload it to the store. It's cool. We can make the computer say something. We can make the phone or tablet say something. It's a cool little thing to show off. Maybe we were excited about that. But it's not as useful for a user. So if someone else downloads this app, it's just going to say one thing. It's going to say, you are doing awesome, or whatever you typed in there. If we want the user to be able to change what this is said, what this says, I should say, we need to add some other component to our app that allows that. So let's go back to design. Let's look at some of the different components we have. And what we're going to need is something in the user interface. We need to add something to our user interface that allows the user to choose or type something that we can instead make the button say when it's clicked. So if you look through these options, I'm sure you may be able to figure out what you need. I suggest to kind of do this as an exercise. You kind of look through and you think about what will I need in order to allow the user to type something, and I can grab that information that they typed in. So the thing that you are looking for is a text box. So if we go and we use this text box right here, just click, drag it. It's a visible component. So you'll notice this little blue line indicates if you're going to put it above or below the button. And don't worry if you dropped it in and you want to move it to below the button. You can, of course, change it around. So notice as I'm making those changes, my app on my phone is updating and it's showing that change. So you can go ahead, you can drop that in. And now we have a text box or an area that the user can type something. So if I go on my phone now and I click in that box, it works just as you expect. My keyboard automatically comes up and it allows me to actually be able to type in there. So it works just as I would expect. And so what we want to do is notice the text box has different properties. So you can do very similar things. You can set a background color. So you know what, I'm not liking my background being in there. I'm going to set it to white so that it actually looks like a box itself there. And there's a number of things that you can do with this that you can mess around with. One of the things that I'm going to suggest that we do, other than maybe change the background color if you'd like, But the other property I'd like to change is the hint. And the hint is what is shown in the text box that helps the user understand what they're supposed to do with this text box. So you may think of some web pages or some apps that you use, right? And how do you know which of the different areas you're supposed to type in your username versus your password? Well, they probably have a little hint in there to say, oh, this is where you type in your username, or username it will say, or it will say password. So let's change this hint so the user knows what they're supposed to say. So we can say something like, what do you want me to say? And then now it will say, so what do you want me to? And you'll notice it's a little cut off on my phone. So if this is an issue for you, you can of course change the width of this. So there's sizing, even the button head sizing. We left it to automatic, but you can go through here and you can set it to a certain percentage. So I'm going to say, you know what? I would like this text box to be 80% of my screen. And now you notice it's bigger. It takes up 80% of my screen, meaning there's 10% of my screen on either side of it. And it says, all right, what do you want me to say? So now I know they want me to type what I want this thing to say for it to talk. So now that we have this text box and you may be designing it to look the way you want, we need to change something in the code, because as of right now, if I click this button, it's just saying you are doing awesome still every time I click on it. So if I want this code to say something different, if I want it to say whatever is typed in this box, I need to make the code read, whatever's typed in this box is what we want it to say. So what I want you to notice is there's another property, before we go over to the blocks, there's a property called text. And the text property is actually what the user types in the box. So if I type hello here, you'll notice that the box actually has the word hello in it. So if I click in here, I can erase the word hello. So the text property is what is displayed in the box, or what the user types. So that's going to become important in a minute when we go over to the blocks, just to keep that in mind. So click on blocks, top right-hand corner again. We can switch between designer and blocks. And what we want our code to read like is, instead of saying, all right, when button 1 is clicked, call text-to-speech.speak, and say whatever I type in here, we want to say, or we want the message to be whatever is typed in the text box. So we know instinctively it's got to be something with this text box component. So let's click on and look at its blocks available to it. So I'm sorry, I clicked on text-to-speech, the text box. And you'll notice that the text box has some event handlers, it has some methods. All right, these are things that do something. These are event handlers that can be used to put code blocks in that will be triggered whenever this event happens. But you may have also noticed these green blocks. And so these green blocks are the property getters and setters, okay? This allows us to change the properties of a component using code, or we can also get the property of a component within our code. So for instance, I had mentioned that that text property is what stores whatever the user types in. So if we scroll down, you'll notice there's a block that says textbox.text. This block gets the text property of the text box. So if we grab this block and we plug it in for the message, and it says, instead of saying you are doing awesome or whatever you typed, and it says now it will say whatever's typed in the text box, whatever the text property is of the text box, it will now say that. And if you accidentally grab the wrong block, for instance, that's not an issue. App Inventor does have these nice little drop downs, so we can just easily change the property. So if we chose read only by accident, we can go in there and we can say, no, we want it to be text. Or the common mistake is you chose text color maybe. So we want it to read textbox.text, that property. And now if I go over here and I type in something like hi, and I press my button, it now says whatever you type in the box. So now any user of this app can type in something and the phone will say it. So maybe this is useful for something, somebody that's not comfortable speaking in certain situations, they can use this. or maybe a person with disabilities that would need some kind of aid to speak for it. Now we've created an app that they can leverage and they can use for this. Or anybody can make it say anything they want.
Hello. Hello. Wow. Wow.
So there we go. We've improved this app now. We've thought about, what the user may need to make this more useful for them. So the next thing that I want to showcase, because this is another important thing to think about, is there are many components within our apps that allow you to change or program for things that are not visible to the actual app screen, something that the user uses. So for instance, we go over and let's go back to Designer, and we go over to the different components we have. And if you scroll down to a section called Sensors, what makes these devices, right? You buy your phone, some phones are like $1,000. There's a lot of different sensors in them. There's lots of stuff in these expensive phones. So we can leverage that technology and we can program for it. So you can see there's a number of sensors here. So the one that I want us to check out that we can add to this app to add a cool, maybe a little hidden feature into it is we can add the accelerometer sensor. And the accelerometer detects motion of our device, how we're moving it around, maybe even shaking it, and that's what we're going to end up programming for. So if you click and you drag this out onto the screen, accelerometer, again in the sensors category, you'll notice that it's added as a non-visible component. There are some properties we can enable it in the interval in which it checks or its events update and its sensitivity. So there are some things we can change, but now this is a sensor inside of the device that we can actually program, and we can set behaviors for ways that our app should interact with changes that the sensor measures. So once you have this accelerometer, let's go over to the blocks. And let's check out some of the blocks that this accelerometer has. So I clicked on the accelerometer sensor, and you'll notice it has two event handlers. So we have acceleration changed, and this detects on each of the axes, the X, the Y, and the Z. So the three axes of movement of the phone, how this device is moving around. And you can use these precise movements for lots of different things. You've played probably some games on your phone where you got to move around the phone in order to control the character, maybe a racing game, for instance. And we could use a block like this and to detect how the user's moving around the device in order to control the character. We could create something like that. And we also have this one here that detects when the user shakes the device. So let's grab this one. And now we can determine when the user actually shakes the device, we can make something happen. So for instance, with the skills that you learned with text-to-speech, we can make it say something. Maybe, like I said, this is kind of like a hidden feature. If the user accidentally shakes their device while they're using our app, we kind of have a little surprise for them. So we can go over to text-to-speech. We can use the speak method again. And maybe we say something kind of surprising to them to alert them that they shook their device. So we can go to text, grab that empty text block. We can say something like, "Hey, stop shaking me." And now if you take your device and you give it a little shake,
Hey, stop shaking me.
it will say,
Hey, stop shaking me.
and notice this is independent of what's going on with the button here. So the button, I can still type something, and I can say, I can click the button.
Hi.
But when I shake it,
Hey, stop shaking me.
so these are different functionalities. These are two different event handlers. They're handling the same method, but notice how the code is different for them. So whenever there's an action on the device that you want to program for, when the user does something, you need to locate the event handler that's going to help you handle that or trigger some code that you want to run when that event happens. So this is our basic app, and the things that I want to point out to kind of close out this idea is we have some different different components that we've added. We have things that are visible on the screen, like a text box and a button, as well as things that are not visible on the screen, like an accelerometer sensor or text-to-speech. And notice how really what we're focusing on here is we got to think about event handlers we need, method calls with these different components that actually perform some action with that component. And then, of course, we can change or we can set different properties as well as get different properties of these different components to change some things. One other thing I want to kind of showcase that will help you as you're developing your apps and your apps get more complex is, let's switch over to Designer quickly. And if I go over and we look at the different components, notice they're all named things like text box 1, button 1, text to speech 1. And this is easy for us to manage with this fairly simple project and one of each of these components. But think about some of the apps you use on a regular basis. For instance, how many buttons do those apps have? You may say, think about it, and maybe you can't quantify it, you can't think of a number, but some of them may have hundreds of buttons. So imagine if the programmer had to memorize what button 1 did, button 2 did, etc. So I'm going to add another button here. And if you want to do this, you can feel free to add a button. Maybe you want to program it to say something else, maybe like a wow button or maybe an easy button, right? You want to do the Staples easy button, that was easy. You can do that. And so when I drag this button in, notice it's just named button 2. So if I had 50 buttons, I would have things like button 1, button 2, button 50, button 45, button 33. And that becomes really complicated to remember what each button does. We're smart enough, we can remember what button 1 and 2 does, but once we get more complex, it really becomes an impossible task. So to help with this, and really whenever you add components, you should really name these components things that make sense. So for instance, I can come over here, I can name my button 1, and I click rename here. And you always want to keep the type of component it is, so the word button, and then you want to add on something that's descriptive for it. So I'll say, button talk, And similar to what I was talking about with the project name, notice how I used camel case here. If I put a space, it'll actually allow it, but notice what happens, it automatically puts in an underscore. So if you put in a space, it's going to automatically put in an underscore for this. But you can either use camel case or you can use the underscores. You can't have spaces for the names of these components either. But notice now I have button talk, and I can go over to this other button and I want to rename it. I can call this one button easy, or even maybe I want to call it the actual easy button. So I say easy button. And now these are named different things. So it's easier for me as a programmer, or if, with Technovation, you're working in teams. So one of your teammates comes over to the project, they may not know what you were doing here if you don't name things properly. So proper names are really important. So now if I go over to the blocks, for instance, you'll notice now it says, all right, when button talk is clicked, then call text-to-speech speak. So this makes more sense. Our code's even more readable. It's more understandable. And then, of course, if I want to program the easy button, now it says easy button's clicked when the easy button is clicked, and it's easier for me to read. So this is a really good way to manage your apps, especially when you're working in teams, when there's multiple people looking at these apps, and they need to know what's going on and what was the point of different things. Another helpful thing with collaboration is any of these blocks, you can right-click and you can add a comment. So notice again, I right-clicked and I added a comment. I can remove the comment now. And if you're working in a team, and let's say you're at home and you're working on it, and your friend's going to work on it later, you can leave them a little comment and explain what this code's for, so they're not lost when they open up this project. Say, this, block of code makes the phone say whatever is in the text box. All right, you can leave them a note, so now they know what this is for, and say, all right, that's what that's doing. So these are really good programming practices, especially when you're working in a team. And again, you just right-click on a block and you say Add Comment, and you can add the comment to that. So I'm going to open up for questions in a minute, and I'd love to hear your questions or ways I can help you. But I want to provide you with a couple little ideas for further resources, and you may have to, go back to this video to kind of find these URLs. But of course, with a quick Google search, you can find some of these things. One thing I want to point out is the App Inventor documentation and support link. So while you're in App Inventor, if you click on this guide, it brings you to this documentation and support page. This is a really helpful page. So when you're in App Inventor, again, just click on guide, and you can get this area here. And if you're wondering, what does this block do? What is any of this code or any problems you're having, maybe even doing this, you can go to the documentation. So we can look at some component documentation. And let's say you're looking at something like in media, like we were looking at, and we say, let's say we want to use the camera. So we can read about what blocks are available with the camera and what it can do. So we can say, all right, events. What kind of events do we have with the camera? After picture, and it gives us an image file that they took. So called after a picture is taken, and the text argument is an image, so it gives us an image back that we can use. And so what kind of methods, what can the camera object or this camera component do? And so what can it do? All right, it can take a picture. Makes sense, right? That's probably what we'd want it to do. So it can take a picture, and so we can use this method to actually take a picture. So that documentation is really helpful. And again, you just click guide and you can get to that really easily. Another thing is on App Inventor's website, there are some really good tutorials. So you can go there and you can follow along with some tutorials. Maybe you want to be able to create a little game that's part of your app, or do some other things. Well, you can go there and you can try that out. One suggestion I have is, for instance, some of your apps may want to have some kind of cloud database. That's a database that's going to store something on a server somewhere else on the internet, so that it doesn't erase when each time the person uses it. Or maybe you need to have some kind of chat feature or messaging feature in your app. The Cloud DB is what you're going to use for that. And this is right here. You have a little chat app tutorial, so you can use this tutorial to help you kind of develop that chat app or add it to your app. As well as on App Inventor's website, we have some other tools that you may be interested in. Again, these are just resources I'm pointing out for you. Things like maybe you want to check out some of App Inventor's artificial intelligence features. So they have two different little tutorials that you can use to use some of the artificial intelligence extensions that App Inventor, the people at MIT have developed for App Inventor. And then maybe you're interested in connecting your app to an IoT device or some board, microcontroller board, like an Arduino or a microbit or Lego EV3. So you can visit this iot.appinventor.mit.edu link, and you can access that also. And if you just search IoT App Inventor, this URL will come up. And they have some information on how to program those things. So lots of possibilities with App Inventor, lots of things that you can do. So a couple other links that I just want to leave up while you're maybe asking me some questions is, some questions that come up. I mentioned this is the URL for the Hour Code version of App Inventor if you don't want to use a Google account. This is the beta version of the iOS one if you want to use that. But another thing that you may be interested in working in teams is maybe students want to work together on the same App Inventor project at the same time. They would have to access and use this real-time collaboration version of App Inventor, rtc.appinventor.mit.edu. So if that's something that a team is interested in doing, you can do that. It is not fully released yet, so we cannot guarantee that it will work flawlessly, but it's a tool that you can use if you're really interested in having students work on it at the same exact time. It would work similar to Google Doc, where students can see what person's working on what in App Inventor and use it. But my students have always been very successful with taking turns and doing good pair programming practices. So it's not necessarily something you'd have to do. All right, so I'm gonna open it up for some questions. You can go ahead and type in the chat. I just opened up the chat on my screen so I can see that. Sarah and Ruth, did anyone have anything?
Thank you so much. As we sit and look to see if there's any questions that come in, I really want to thank you. Reminder that this is available on our website. So that's masstlc.org. And you can either use the menu to go to the Education Foundation or Technovation Girls, or you can just type it in. And we have some great programming coming up, a mix of in-person and online, specifically in person. We're looking at, and we'll confirm this hopefully in the next day or two, February 29th for UI UX, which again, Joe is helping to put together and design with somebody from the Rhode Island School of Design. And then also in person is the Advanced App Inventor Workshop. And I do want to make one clarification, just in case I wasn't entirely clear. For the showcase in May, you can do virtual, but you instead of competing against just those here in the region for Rhode Island and Massachusetts, you're going to be competing against the entire world. And if you come to the showcase, the top teams do move on automatically for the next part of the challenge. So it definitely does help if that's your goal, is to continue to move on through the challenge. If you're just looking to, create a business and an app, that's amazing as well. So we, definitely don't want to deter you if you can't make it. Any other last minute suggestions or anything, Joe, that I'm missing?
No. So definitely refer to this. I can understand that maybe the session where we just went over may be overwhelming if you're some students watching. So what's great about this is it's a video resource. So you can go back, rewind, and pause this later on. So that might be extremely helpful to you. And of course, I am available if you need any expertise on MIT App Inventor. I am a MIT App Inventor Master Trainer. And if you need to, some clues on things that you should add to accomplish certain goals, you can email me, and you can, if you only have Sarah or Ruth's email, you can email them and they'll get you in touch with me. But I will provide my email right here, just for those listening. So you can email me, joemazzone@outlook.com, and I will email you back with some helpful hints. So if there's any questions, other people may have similar questions. So I'll just kind of give everyone one more chance to type something in this chat for us.
Joe, there's a comment from Karen at MIT saying that you should mention that if you use RTC server, they should definitely save their projects to the computer after each session.
Absolutely, yeah. So same thing, yeah. The code, so codeappinventor.mit.edu. So that one and the RTC, you need to save those to your computer for sure. So don't expect those to work exactly like your normal App Inventor account. I wouldn't do not expect that behavior.
All right, well, so with that, thank you so much. Really appreciate your help here today, Joe. And we look forward to seeing everybody in a couple of weeks.
Excellent. See everyone soon.
Bye-bye.